You are listening to the Information Security Innocent Podcast, episode 41, originally released on January 21st, 2021. As always, I'm your host, Josh Amishav. Today we have Chris Hadnagy on the show. Chris is the founder of SocialEngineer.org and LLC, as well as the Innocent Lives Foundation. He's written 5 books on social engineering, as well as started the Human Hacker Conference, the Social Engineer Podcast, and is the brains behind the Social Engineering Village at DEF CON. Today we're going to talk about his latest book, Human Hacking, which focuses on the human psychology behind social engineering. My 3 main takeaways from our conversation were 1, how to identify personality types and communicate effectively based on a DISC assessment, 2, how oxytocin and amygdala hijacking affect how we make decisions, and 3, how to get started in a career as a social engineer. You'll enjoy those 3 things plus a bunch of other tips along the way. Direct support for this podcast comes from BreachSense. According to the Verizon Data Breach Investigations Report, stolen credentials are consistently one of the most common methods used in hacking-related breaches. It's no wonder when the average user recycles the same password across 4 different accounts. BreachSense gives security teams visibility into their clients, employees, and third-party suppliers' breach credentials before criminals exploit them. Go to breachsense.io/contact to start your free 7-day trial. And now, here's my conversation with Chris. Chris Hadnagy, welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me. It's great to be here.
Thanks. So you just wrote, I think it's your 5th book.
It is,
Okay,
amazingly enough.
yes, about social engineering called Human Hacking, and it's an excellent book.
Thank you.
I'd like to back up a bit. How did you get into social engineering?
Yeah, that's an interesting story because it's not something I even thought would ever be a job. So I was a part of a team that did pen testing, like network pen testing and training. And whenever we did a pen test, I was not good at the coding part. I mean, I did it, but I didn't really like it, and I was slower than everyone else. So I would be the guy who'd make a phone call or send an email or do something that we now classify as social engineering. And it really worked well. So after doing that for quite a bit, I said, we should write a course on this. We should train other people how to do this. And my boss at the time, he was like, well, before we can ever write a course, we need a framework, see if there's one out there. And there wasn't. There was no framework for social engineering. So I ended up writing that framework, and it still lives on social-engineer.org. That was now going back maybe 12 or 13 years. And when that framework came out, after a couple months, I actually got a call from Kevin Mitnick's publisher at the time, and she asked me to write a book on the framework, which I did eventually. And that was my very first book, Social Engineering, The Art of Human Hacking. And it was the first book that ever really defined what social engineering was and how it can be used. And that book is what made me form my company, which is now, going on 11 or 12 years, and where I've been doing this for a full-time career since then.
Wow. So your latest book, Human Hacking, it has an interesting subtitle: "When Friends Influence People and Leave Them Off Better for Having Met You." Why is the leaving them off better for having met you? Why is that an important part of social engineering?
Because I think so my definition, right, for social engineering is anything that influences a person, so any act that influences a person to make an action that may or may not be in their best interest. I think there's 2 sides to social engineering. The negative that we talk about a lot, like phishing, vishing, smishing, those kind of things. And then there's the good side, the side that we use every day when we're dealing with our family and friends. And this particular book wasn't about how to be an attacker. It wasn't about how to find the attacks and all of that. It was more about how can you use these skills in your everyday life. So the leave them feeling better for having met you was such an important part of this book because it really meant that I wanted people to take away from this that, yeah, you can use every one of these skills maliciously. You could really harm people with this. But if you focus on that mantra, that you'll be able to use these skills, get the things that you want out of life, but do it and people will still feel good.
Which brings us to, I guess, one of the first pages in the book is essentially a contract that you're asking people to sign,
Yeah,
which is kind of a unique way to start a book.
it is. When it was kind of a funny idea when we started writing the book. The guy who was writing with me, Seth, he's like a ghostwriter, but not necessarily because his name's there. He said, "Wow, these are way too powerful. Like, are you afraid about putting them out?" And I said, I teach this class and I've been teaching this class for a decade. And I tell people in the class when they come, I say, look, these skills, you could take them and you can go out here and tomorrow and you could be the worst person on the planet with these, or you can choose to be an amazing person that helps others. And he's like, we should make a contract. And I'm like, that is an awesome idea. So we put it in there, and basically it's just, there's no way for us to enforce it, but it's a mental contract that people can sign, and it just reinforces the idea that these skills are ridiculously powerful. And I want you to take them out, use them, but I want you to do it in a way that's going to really leave people feeling better for having met you, and not use them to harm anybody.
So, if I were to summarize the book in one word, it'd be empathy. What does empathy mean to you?
So it's the ability to understand, and I'm gonna caveat this. So let me just say it though. It's the ability to understand how someone else feels about a situation. Now, when I say that, we have to really try to deeply understand what that means. So it's not me saying to you, "Hey, Josh, I allow you to have your feelings." That's not empathy, right? That's not it. And maybe you're going through a situation that I cannot understand because I haven't been through it. Like maybe you lost a family member and I haven't because of COVID. So I can't sit here and say, "Wow, I truly understand what you're going through." That's not a true statement. So for me, empathy takes it down to the level of saying to myself, "Hey, you know what? Josh and I just had this interaction, and it wasn't great. And he said some things he didn't mean, and it was hurtful. But let me see why he might have done that." And looking at what's going on in your life and saying, "Wow, he's dealing with the stress of this family problem and job stress and this." And then allowing that to go to my mind and say, "You know what? I bet he didn't mean all that stuff he said." And reframing the interaction. And empathy, if we communicate with empathy, we can solve so many problems. It means I take your needs and your wants and I put them in a level above my own.
Are there situations where using empathy will backfire?
Yeah, there are some dangers. So empathy, of course, could make us vulnerable. That's possible, right? Because we're now putting other people's needs in front of our own, so it can make us vulnerable to attack, or it can make us vulnerable to malicious people. That's always the case with empathy. And then sometimes there's things where you have to put yourself first, right? Self care. Maybe a family member or a close friend or someone you care for is toxic and you want to help them. But every time you do, it takes a toll on you mentally. Um, you may have to, at that point, say, "Look, I empathize with their needs, but they need to find someone else to help them because I don't have the capacity." Right? You can think of it almost in a physical sense. If I hurt my back and my best friend needs help moving their couch, yeah, I'm a strong guy, I'm a big guy, but maybe that's not the best time for me to go and say, "I can help you because you're my best friend." I just hurt my back, and doing so may hurt my back more and disable me from being able to take care of my family. So while I may empathize, and that empathy may make me say, "Hey, let me get someone else." My brother, he'll come and help you because I can't do it. And then I help him find the help that he needs. And that's the way empathy may motivate me. So we have to just be cautious that we don't let empathetic response take over critical thinking and make us do something that's harmful to us or our families.
So, in the context of, let's say, of a social engineering engagement, how would you use empathy to increase your chances of success?
I could tell you this by a story, actually, maybe. So I had this account where I was entering a building. My job was to break in. My pretext was going to be that I had a meeting with HR and I was running late. And my hope is that when I got in there, that my stress of running late, that she would just be like, "Oh, go," and buzz me in, and I would get past and be able to go and hack the company. That was my pretext I had. As I was walking into the building, I heard one of the a guy was parked his car in a spot that said CFO, and he was on his phone, and his window was down a little bit. And as I was passing his car, I heard him say, "I don't want to do this. This is going to hurt a lot of people." Now I don't know what he was talking about, but I thought, man, this doesn't sound like a good day for some folks there, thinking maybe they'll do some layoffs or make a decision that wasn't going to be easy. I put that in the back of my mind. I walk in the front door. The gatekeeper sitting at her desk. I could see her monitor from the way I walked in, and she's playing a video game. And in my mind, I just thought to myself, "Yeah, I know I'm here to break into the place, but man, if her boss walks in with what he just said, he may like embarrass her, yell at her." So she does the normal thing, turns, says, "Oh, how can I help you?" And I said, "Look, I'm here for a meeting, but just forget that for a second. Look, your boss is out in his car, and he's really upset, and it sounds like he's got some bad news today. And if he walks in and sees that game on your screen, he might get really angry. And she clicks the X on the screen, closes the game down, turns back to me very politely, not upset at all. And she goes, "Oh, thank you. How can I help you?" So as soon as I start telling her my pretext, the boss walks in and he goes, "Beth, in my office." So Beth gets up and she's walking towards his office and she turns around and mouths to me the words "thank you." So she says it not audibly, right? She just mouths "thank you." And at that point, I returned back to social engineer method. I knew that gift, that empathetic gift I gave to her, saving her, was going to get me in. So people came up and they're like, "Hey, you need help?" And I said, "No, no, Beth is coming back. I just waited for her." And 5, 6 minutes later, she came back out. She's like, "Oh, you're still here?" And I said, "Oh yeah, no one came up to help, so I just thought I'd wait for you." And she's like, "Where were we?" And I said, "Oh, I'm running late for my HR meeting. You just had to buzz me in." And she paused for like a full 5 seconds, just looking at me like, "Really?" Like almost like it was almost like awkward enough that I thought she was just going to say, "No, that didn't happen." And she's like, "Oh yeah, right." And she buzzed me in and I got in. So later on, after the whole thing's over, I had a chance to talk to her. I asked for permission to talk to her in the report meeting. And I asked her, like, "Why did you do that?" And she said, "You saved me from being embarrassed." And I thought, a nice guy like that can't possibly be lying. So she let me in. She broke protocol just because I was a nice guy. So empathy, and in doing that, I didn't leave her feeling worse for having met me. She wasn't embarrassed. I saved her from any potential harm. She got training, and she's still employed. So it's like you can use empathy and compassion and still get your goals aligned. And at the end, when people find out it was a social engineering event, they of course they still got duped, but they feel not as violated as if you were to use pretext that might have gotten them in trouble.
It's interesting. You mentioned the importance of pretext, and you talk about that a lot in the book. Do you have any advice on strategically choosing the right pretext?
Oh, that's a great question. That's a hard question to answer because pretext for us, for me especially, always get developed after I do the OSINT, right? So I do open source intelligence gathering on my target or my target company, and then based on what I find, the pretext will come, right? We just had a job. Well, I shouldn't say just. It was pre-COVID. We were going to break into this facility, and in doing the OSINT, we found that they used this special clock that had GPS antennas connected to it, and it connected to a satellite, and it always kept the proper time. These were time clocks. And we found that in 3 months from the time we were breaking in, 3 months previous, that there was a major update rolled out to these clocks. So that became our pretext, right? As we were consultants for this clock manufacturer, and we had to get in to make sure the update took and that all the software was running right. And that worked on 9 buildings. We were able to access with absolutely not getting stopped at all. But that came from OSINT. So the idea about the pretext always come from after we do the OSINT to find out about the company and not before.
Interesting. Does different cultural, yes, I don't know if you have experience breaking into in facilities in different countries, but do different cultures, does the empathy or pretext change drastically based on culture?
Yeah, that definitely is the case. If if I'm breaking into a company, I'm just thinking of some of the places we've been, right? Let's say fence contractor or something like that, predominantly 50-year-old men. I'm not going to send in my 30-something blonde female SE that I have on my team because she's going to be so distracting and not like the normal people in that company that they won't remain in alpha mode. They'll all be looking at her like, "Wait, what are you doing here?" And as soon as they start thinking, we fail. If Ryan, my COO, and I, we had to go break into 3 banks in Jamaica, and we didn't fit in. I mean, we were probably the only white people in that area, so we had to choose a pretext that allowed for that oddity to be realistic. So yeah, pretext and culture will make a huge difference when we break into places, either just a political culture, a standard culture like in this country, or if another country, we have to consider all of those factors when we're deciding what pretext we'll use.
So one of the interesting things that, at least for me in the book, you mentioned William Martin, who created Wonder Woman, and kind of the aha moment for me. I don't remember the exact sentence, but we're talking about what superhero would be best at social engineering, and the answer was Wonder Woman, based on the lasso of truth. One of the other things that William created was the disc profiles. Can you talk a bit about the different profiles and how you should talk differently to each of them?
Sure. So, what I found fascinating about Marston's work uh, was, how old. Like, we're talking back in the 30s now, and he developed. He also created the polygraph, and he was really into studying how to communicate with people and understand, truth versus lies. So he came up with this concept of four different quadrants of communicators. And the reason I tend to like this type of profiling is because it's very easy and quick to use. It's not a psychological profile, it is literally just a communications profile. So we start off with D. D stands for a dominant communicator. A D communicator is someone who's very forceful, straightforward. There's really no BS with them. They just tell you the way it is. They generally care more about task than they do people, and they're very direct. An I, which stands for influencer. They are also um, on the direct side, so they're more direct than indirect, but they care more about people. They're generally gregarious, outgoing, lively. They're the center of attention at a party. They're the people who you see as like salespeople all the time. They love to talk, they love to have the spotlight, and they're not afraid of taking risks. An S, which stands for steady or steadfast, that kind of a person is a supporter. That's another reason S can stand for that. They're the ones who would like literally fall on their sword for the team. They want to make sure everybody gets along, everybody has a justified piece of the puzzle. They really care about the people that they work with. They're generally indirect communicators that care about people. And then C's, conscientious types, they're indirect and task focused, and they are more about lists and details. They love details. They love to have lists about everything that they do. Decision making is based on the facts and statistics and details. So they are a very organized, detailed type of communicator. Now, when you look at that, like kind of the way I draw it is as a circle with the DISC. What's important is that you first understand your communication profile, where you fall in that, because when, like, let's say I'm a D, right? So I'm more direct, task focused, and I'm forceful, and I could be really really direct with people. Now, if I'm going to go communicate with an S, let's say the complete juxtaposition from where I am on that circle, that's a person who's indirect and people focused. So if my target's an S and I want to influence him or her, I'm going to have to change my style or I'm going to turn them off. So if I come in purely focused on task, really direct, they're going to think, man, this guy doesn't care about the team at all. So you have to adjust your communications profile, sometimes drastically, in order to communicate with a person and being able to influence them.
Let's switch to the science behind making decisions, and you talk a bit about oxytocin and amygdala hijacking. Can you explain a bit how those, like, how do they influence how we make decisions?
Sure. Dr. Paul Zak wrote a book called The Moral Molecule, where he released a bunch of studies he did into oxytocin. And what he found is that oxytocin is released heavier in our system when we feel trusted, not when we feel trust. So, like, if I were to say to you, "Hey, Josh, I'm going to tell you something," and your listeners here on the podcast that I haven't told anyone else. It's brand new information. And it was true. Let's say it was true. You believe that. You found out I really trusted you with this brand new secret. Your brain released oxytocin, and I'm its deliverer, which means that later on, if you're scrolling through social media and you see my LinkedIn profile, and your brain will go, hey, that's the guy who trusted you, and it will release oxytocin. So we could see this, and maybe they don't understand the brain chemistry, but we could see that scam artists and con men have used this throughout millennia of human history. They come and they charm their victims. They make them feel trusted. Look at Victor Lustwig. He's the guy who's most well known for selling the Eiffel Tower and the Brooklyn Bridge. And the way he did it was he got really rich people and he gave them a secret. The Eiffel Tower is going to be taken apart and the metal's going to be sold for scrap. And by the way, I have this in on this metal dealer who's going to give us top dollar. If you want in now, buy in. And he was able to literally sell the Eiffel Tower twice, scam people twice with that by getting people to make that they feel trusted. Now, that's completely different when we looked at amygdala hijacking. So, our amygdala, there's two of them. They're just small walnut sized pieces of gray matter in our brain. And their whole purpose is to take all external stimuli. So, our five senses bring in all this external stimuli, and it processes that external stimuli before our actual brain has time to catch up. So, an example I often use is, let's say you're deathly afraid of snakes. Your brain knows that. You're walking through your yard one day, and out of the corner of your eye, you see this long black thing. Your amygdala perceives it as a snake, so it reacts in fear. Your eyes open wide, you gasp, your hands pull back, you reel away from the thing. About a second later, your brain catches up and goes, it's the garden hose, silly, and you calm back down. But that initial fear reaction was based on your amygdala getting hijacked. Now, the way attackers use this is they trigger strong emotional content in you. And when that strong emotion is triggered, your amygdala takes over processing power in your brain. And when it does that, logic centers no longer are firing on full energy. So that means the next decision you make may be based solely on your emotional state. So if they trigger fear, your credit card got hacked, your bank account, your daughter's kidnapped, whatever it is, the next decision you make may be based solely on that fear response and no critical thinking or logic.
And another thing you discussed was the macro and micro facial expressions. How important are those when you're on an engagement? How important are those to influence their targets?
Well, first, I think they're important in everything in life, right? For two reasons. One is our own, because we have something in our brain called mirror neurons. So the expression that we are showing on our face will be mirrored by the person that is viewing it. So if we're showing fear, but we're trying to be confident in our pretext, that incongruent feeling will cause the person to feel uncomfortable with you. If we're aggressive, but we're trying to show like we're calm and cool and collected, again, they'll feel incongruent about us. So,
Does the fake it till you make it then, like fake a smile, does that
yeah,
influence you?
it does. As a matter of fact, if Amy Cuddy's research proves that if you if you fake it and you blend that with Dr. Ekman's research from '73, where if you make the facial expression, it actually creates the emotional content, right? So from the first half, yes, it's very important for us to understand it so we influence our targets properly. From the other half, it's really important that we understand it because as we're seeing our targets and we can read facial expressions, we'll be able to determine if we're doing good or not. So if we're doing bad and someone's showing fear, we'll be able to quickly realize, oh man, I just created the wrong emotion. I did not want them to feel that. And we can readjust. It takes time, right? It's not an easy thing to learn because we're learning to do things that we had when we were babies. So we were all born with this skill uh, built into us. And then as we got older, we started to rely more on words and feelings than we did what we saw. And we kind of taught ourselves out of it. So relearning it is like relearning a skill that we had from infancy.
Interesting. What are some techniques people can do to protect themselves or to first identify that they're being scammed and to protect themselves against social engineering?
So I think it comes back to that last thing you brought up, which is amygdala hijacking. I tell people that when you're sitting in front of your email or you get a phone call or you meet somebody, if your brain automatically triggers worry or fear or strong emotion, any strong emotion, that's a good time to take a pause and say, what decision am I being asked to make? And before you make that decision, Dr. Daniel Goleman is the one who did research into amygdala hijacking. He found that something as little as a 30-second pause, getting our brain to catch up to the amygdala, could make us return to critical thinking processes. Many times, the way attackers want to work is they want you to make a decision now, right? There's an attack going around in this country right now where they call a parent from a spoofed number, but it looks like their daughter's number, and they say, "We have kidnapped your daughter. We're going to hurt her unless you forward, $2,000 worth of iTunes gift cards or Bitcoin or whatever it is to this address." And you can't hang up. If you hang up, we kill her. All that kind of stuff. Your brain is racing with emotions at that moment. It's racing with fear, And many people will make the decision to just lose the $2,000 for the risk that she may be there getting hurt. So when we are hijacked or we feel heavily emotional, is the time to take a little pause, reconfigure, say, hey, am I being asked to do something? And if I am, maybe I should rethink the action I'm being asked to take to make sure it's not unsafe.
Excellent. Do you have any advice for somebody who wants to get into social engineering professionally?
Yeah, that's a question I get asked probably the most. It's probably the single most popular question I get asked. Um, 5, 6, 8 years ago, it was really hard. I told people, man, not a lot of people are doing this. There was my company and maybe a handful of others that were hiring for social engineering, and it was hard to get in. Now that's not the case. Almost every pen testing company has some social engineering avenue to it. People will always ask, "Do you need a college degree to do this?" The answer is no. But with that being said, a lot of companies want you to have a degree just to get the job, but not necessarily in social engineering. Right now, there's only one program I know that has a social engineering degree. It's because I'm teaching it at University of Arizona. I don't know of others. I know that there's a couple other universities that teach some semblance of social engineering in their courses that could be very, very helpful to a person wanting to get into the field. But a lot of times, what I tell people is to practice conversations with everyday people. Tell yourself that you could do it. Just go out with and I know now it's not safe. We can't be out in the public too much, but next time you're on a phone call or a Zoom meeting, committing to learning something new about a stranger you haven't met before, seeing how you can do that. The better you become at just off the cuff conversations, the easier getting into social engineering will be. And then once you decide this is the path you want, realize that every job in this field sounds super sexy on paper, but it's just like every other pen test job. It's like 10% of it's awesome, and the rest of it is report writing and sitting at a computer. So don't think it's all Mission Impossible sneakers kind of stuff. There's work involved, um, and then reach out to companies that are hiring for pen testing and say, do you do social engineering? This is my goal in the future. I'd love to become part of your team and do this. And there's a lot more people out there hiring for this.
So, besides for if you're not near the University of Arizona, and besides for your books, are there other books that you would recommend?
Yeah, so I on the social-engineer.org site, in the resources section, I have a list of books that I have read and that my podcast listeners have recommended. So books like anything from Michael Bazzell with the OSINT, like that's an amazing skill set. Nick Furno has a course and books on that. The psychology books I recommend from Amy Cuddy, Dr. Ekman, Joe Navarro, Daniel Goleman. These are all books that can really help you hone the skills of learning how to communicate with people better. And then from the social engineering angle, of course, I would recommend my books and the framework and things like that. And there's quite a few people now talking about this topic. Uh, there's a conference up in Rhode Island. I don't know if it's going to be this year, if it's virtual or not, but it's called Layer 8. It's a smaller hacker conference that focuses on social engineering. I have a conference that I run called the Human Hacking Conference, which will be virtual this year. Which there's a ton of skill sets there, and companies that come to hire people and things like that. I have a Slack channel where we discuss social engineering all day, and there's people in there hiring and looking for employees, and a LinkedIn group. So there's a lot of avenues that people can find to come and discuss the topic and get involved in the social engineering community that can help.
Great. And if people want to find more about you, these communities, is that all on social engineer?
Yeah, so social-engineer.org, social-engineer.com, and my Twitter is human hacker. So they can go into any one of those, and if somebody missed this or can't find a link, just tweet at me, and I'll be more than happy to set you up.
Okay. And the website for the new book is?
Humanhackingbook.com, and then the conference is humanhackingconference.com, if you can believe that.
Excellent. Okay. And the book is highly recommended,
Thank you so much.
at least for me. All right. My wife and kids are waiting to in line to read the book as well
Oh,
here.
really? That's awesome. Yeah, it's a really good. I tell you, when my daughter was younger, she's 16 now. When my daughter was younger, I started teaching her these skills as well as my son. He's 28 now, and it's such great skills for your kids to have. That for children to have these skills is so helpful because it keeps them protected in life. They can learn to see maybe people who might be dangerous to them, and it also helps them to learn how to communicate better, which is something that we all need, but especially in this day and age that's so internet driven. It can help our children with that. So I always recommend these kind of things for kids.
Yeah, and as a parent, you have that story where you were driving and your daughter stopped you
Yeah,
because there was somebody on the side of the road. That, like, as a parent, you did a good job
it is.
when they're that sensitive.
That story just sticks with me for the rest of my life because it's like, man, as scary as that was like a crowning achievement for me that day. So it felt good.
Can you share the story? We've
Sure.
already
So
discussed it.
my daughter was maybe 3 or 4 when she started learning nonverbals, and she really became an expert at it and starting to be able to read faces. And I was training her and constantly working with her on it. And I always taught her, make sure you use these skills properly. Like, don't embarrass people. Like, if you see an emotion on their face, don't call them out. But if there's something you can do to help, always be there to, be kind and empathetic, help. So one day we were driving home from an event, and she said, "Dad, did you see that woman sitting on that bench? She looked really sad." And I said, "No, I didn't. I didn't see her." And I just kept driving, and she's like, "We have to go back." And I'm like, "Oh no, come on, I'm past it." And she's like, "Dad, you always said if I see people that we can help, we should help them." I'm like, "Crap!" Using my own words against me. I can't exactly argue the logic now. How am I supposed to do that? So I'm like, "Okay." So we go and do a U-turn. We come back, and sure enough, this woman's sitting on a bench, and her face is distorted in sadness. Well, I put it in park, and Amaya is jumping out of the car, and I'm like, "Wait, wait, wait! Like, come on, you're like 9. Like, give me a second." And she runs up to the woman, and she's like, "Hey, I'm sorry to bother you, but we were driving by, and it looks like you're a little sad. Are you okay?" And this woman just breaks down crying. She's got a divorce. Her husband kicked her out of the house. She had nowhere to go. We offered her help. We offered to see if she needed something, but she said she had some friends coming. They were going to help her, but she just was sitting there and just kind of reflecting, and it made her real sad. And then she asked me, can I give your daughter a hug? And she hugged Amaya, and we left this woman feeling better that she was noticed. Someone saw her. Someone saw her pain and then identified it and just stopped to comfort her for no other reason. We didn't want anything from her. We didn't need anything. We just stopped to tell her, hey, people see you and you're worth something. And, like you said, as a parent, you see that and you're like, man, okay, I did one thing right in my life. That's it. I'll take it. Like that kind of empathy is a power.
Yeah, and just to go full circle, that's exactly what the "leave them better off for having met you" is about, I think.
Yes.
Excellent. All right. Well, thank you for your time.
Thank you.
All right, that's it for this week. If you have any comments or questions, then tweet at me at Jamoose. And if you got value from this episode, then please share it with a friend. See y'all next week.